are ready.
All right, so back in 2022, towards the end of the year, I was scrolling through TikTok for probably longer than I should have been. And I came across one of these videos, and it was this lady that gave her mental health habits, and she wanted you to take into consideration possibly adding some of these to your life. So I did one of them. I set a reminder on my phone that would go off every night at 9 o'clock, and it would remind me to just write down one thing. So I'd take a sticky note, and in the corner I'd write down the date, and then under it I'd write 1 to 2 sentences about something good that happened that day. And it could be anything big or small, just something that kind of made me happy, made me enjoy the day a little bit. So I would go write down, and sometimes it was something big, like we won a big soccer game. Sometimes I just really enjoyed the Monte Cristo I had at Java Bistro that morning, so I'd just write about that. And I would take the sticky note and I would toss it into a little shoebox. And then at the end of the year, I was able to go look back at them. And I looked back at all these little sticky notes that I'd written down, and I realized as I went through them, as I shuffled through them, that some of them I didn't really need a sticky note to remember those moments because those moments kind of shaped me into the person that I am today. Others of those sticky notes I completely forgot about. But my year, regardless, was made up of those moments. But it was made up of more than those moments. It was made up of the bad and also the mundane moments, just the boring old life. So these moments are what make up your life. And I think today what I'm going to talk about is that you can be stuck in time. That was my title a second ago, as you saw it. You have to address your time. You have to address your past. You have to address your future, and you have to address your present situation. So I think there are three different ways to be stuck in time. First, you can be stuck in your past. That's when you let something that happens here affect who you are today. Whether that could be something that's happened with your parents or just friends, something that has been traumatic or shameful in your life that has, quote unquote, damaged who you are today. And I think you have to take responsibility for your past, but at the same time, your past shouldn't have to define you. Then, the second way is being stuck in the future. At the beginning of this year, I finished sending in my 10 college applications. I didn't have a list of 1 through 10, I just had 10 schools. And as I thought about my college decision, I came up with like thousands of different scenarios in my head. What if I go to Baylor and all this stuff kind of happens? What if I go to Virginia Tech and all this happens? I'm coming up with thousands of scenarios in my head. But the truth is that only one of these things would actually end up happening. And the one I thought would happen was not the one that actually did. So you can be stuck in the future when you're constantly worrying or being anxious about things that are yet to happen. The third way that you can be stuck in time is being complacent. The best way to explain that word is I know anyone in here that plays soccer probably knows what complacency means because there's always that one kid when your team goes up 1-0 or 2-0 that yells, it's still 0-0. They don't want you to be complacent. They don't want you to be too relaxed because then your team might get scored on or whatever it is, but they don't want you to be too relaxed. So complacency is like a contentment, an excessive contentment about your position. And I think when you address these things, there are three postures that we ought to take. And I think Paul says it very well. He says, so now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest of these is love. I think these are the three postures that you ought to take when you face and address your past, present, and future. When addressing your past, I think you should have a posture of hope. When addressing your present, love, and your future, faith. And I'm going to get into each one of these a little bit more. I'm going to start once again in the past. The best example of shame in the Bible, in my opinion, is John chapter 8. Jesus is teaching at Mount Olive, and that's when the Pharisees come up to him, and with them they bring a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. See, according to the Mosaic law, she was supposed to be then stoned to death. But Jesus then says the famous line to the Pharisees. He says, let you who is without sin cast the first stone. Then he addresses the woman. He says to her, did they not condemn you? She says, no, Lord, no. Then neither do I. Now go and sin no more. See, there's a few points that I would like you to take away from this passage. And the first is how he addresses the Pharisees. He tells them that, yes, even though you may not be sinning at this current moment, that you are still a sinner. Therefore, you are not able to judge other people. And likewise, I don't think I'm sinning while I'm up here talking in front of you. But at the same time, I know I've sinned multiple times in my life and multiple times within the past 24 hours. So I'm still a sinner in need of saving. Then he addresses the woman. And after saving her from the death that she deserved according to the law, he tells her that I do not condemn you, but he leaves her with an instruction. Because I have saved you from the death you deserved, now go and sin no more. And I'm going to get back to that a little bit when I talk about the present. Ephesians 1:7 says it best. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. See, we can have hope that we do not have to be ashamed about yesterday, about our past. The second one I'm going to talk about is being stuck in the future. See, I talked about my college decision earlier and how that made me anxious and everything like that, but you realize it's small in comparison to the way that Jesus was anxious at one point in the Bible. See, Jesus, after the Last Supper, knew that he was moments away from being arrested and then hours away from being beaten and crucified. So, in that time, he went to the garden and he prayed. And as he prayed, he began to sweat, and his sweat turned into blood. Modern medicine can actually tell us what was happening at that moment. It's actually called hematidrosis. So what's happening is your capillary blood vessels that feed your sweat glands actually burst. And then the blood begins to pour out of your sweat glands rather than just normal sweat. So there's only been a handful of cases of that happening in modern medicine, like a very, very small handful. And Jesus was going through that moments before his arrest. See, but what is the posture that Jesus takes when he's praying? First thing to note is that he goes straight to the Father. He doesn't go talk to his friends about it. He talks to God about it. Then he says, not my will, but your will be done. See, although it doesn't really make sense that, something awful is about to happen to him and he's just okay with it, we don't know what's going to happen to us. We don't know what's going to come next with college or whatever it is for you. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. But if you submit in faith, then you can trust that everything will work together for good. Philippians 4:19 says, and my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus. Finally, I'm going to talk about the present. So we have faith that we do not have to worry about tomorrow. Finally, I'm going to talk about the present. And as that first verse we looked at, we talked about how love is the greatest of these. So I think the gospel often talks about how your past is redeemed and how your future in heaven is secure. But what does that mean for today? Because I think there's a common misconception about what you should be doing today. And today, often we view Christianity as it's just about being close to God. But that's not complete. For me, I'm actually going to skip a slide because I want to go to this first. For me, this is a moment when I felt close to God. This was in the Dominican Republic. Bush is laughing in the back because he knows what was happening in this picture. The night before, I had gotten text about, friends going through different situations. And then one of my friends also got into an ATV accident and he had been airlifted to the hospital. And then I felt completely useless because I was 1,000 miles away, whatever, on just some island. Felt completely useless. But for some reason, we all decided to wake up that morning and go watch the sunrise. As I watched that sunrise, I felt closer to God than ever. And for some reason, it didn't make sense to me, but I wasn't worried about everything else that was happening in my life. It was just peace. And that's good. That's a very good moment for me to look back at. But that's not what this is all about. You see, if I had that moment where I felt extremely close to God and didn't do anything with it when I came back, then it was a waste of time. Because we often think Christianity is just about going to church or reading your Bible or just feeling close to God, like that moment for me in the DR. But you have to work on the relationship between you and God, and that's good. But then you have to go share it with others. And I think that's what you should be doing today, regardless of your situation. John 15:12 says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So today our job is to act out of love. And when you act out of love each day, the frames that I showed on the first slide, those start to become a little bit more full. You realize that you're making use of your time well. And then, so if you could actually, I'm going to end with this. If you could just picture yourself driving to your favorite destination. You're in the car and you're halfway there. In front of you, you have your windshield, and then your rear view mirror, and you're on your way to your favorite destination. Okay. So, the country artist Jelly Roll said it like this last year. Um, he says the windshield is bigger than the rear view mirror for a reason. What's in front of you is so much more important than what's behind you. I think that's true. But your past has also brought you to where you are right now. Your future destination, whatever that is for you, the family you want to have, the job you want to work, whatever you're excited about in your future, that's good too. But you're also in your current position for a reason. I think that when you continually appreciate where you are each day and act out of love, you realize that the Christian life is not just about the assurance of heaven one day, but you might actually find yourself fulfilled by the day-to-day process of becoming like Jesus. Thank you.
I've never heard faith, hope, and love applied this way. I thought that was really neat, and I especially think it's neat to think about the past with hope, and like to be hopeful for the past, because we obviously all would have put hope in which category in the future, obviously. And I'm really into that of actually you look at your past with hope. I One of the things I thought was interesting, this verse that I in reading the Bible hasn't ever really stood out that much to me for some reason, but in recent days is in John 18 when they come to get Jesus in the garden. John puts this little clause in there and says, Jesus, knowing all that was about to happen to him, asked, who are you looking for? I don't know. I guess there's a question in that. Like you did mention that like the difference for Jesus is that he knows exactly what's about to happen to him, and we don't. Which do you think is worse?
I don't necessarily know which one is worse, but the posture that should be taken regardless is submission through faith. And I don't know if I would necessarily want to know exactly what's happening to me. I feel like that would almost make me more anxious about it. I think, yeah, I don't think I would want to know exactly what's going to happen.
So I'm going to jump in because what I wanted to say was along those lines. Looking ahead in faith isn't about how much, and this is everybody, like lean in on this one because this is a conversation. Looking at your future in faith is not about how much you know about your future. Like, let that sink in. Looking at your future in faith is not a matter of accumulated knowledge. Jesus knew what was about to happen to him. We don't. And yet, I believe there was a tremendous amount of trust in the Father that Jesus was experiencing. Not my will, but your will be done. Right? That was the prayer. I'm gonna brag on you a little bit, Kyle, because you ended that paper really well, and I was kind of hoping you would pull that out on the
do you want me to?
as well. Yeah, could you explain that a little bit?
Okay. So at the end of my paper, I talked about how we each have like a beginning and an end, and we don't necessarily know what that beginning and end is. Like we don't know when we're gonna die. Jesus did. He knew what was coming. And on his last night, he went and he ate dinner with his disciples. But what was the most important thing that he did? He washed their feet. He didn't wait for them to, like celebrate him and wash Jesus' feet, but he washed theirs. And so it's like acting out of service as well.
So looking at your future in faith is not about how much knowledge you have of your future or the certainty that you have of your future. It's about your service and obedience now. So y'all don't know what's going to happen in a year or two, but you know what you ought to be doing now. And even if you did know all of those details, that wouldn't change what you should be doing now. So why be so anxious about what's happening? Because it doesn't change what you should be doing now. If Jesus didn't know what was about to happen to him, I feel like he still would have washed feet, right? That was what was so challenging about like reading your paper, listening to this or whatever. It's like, yeah, you get anxious about tomorrow. Why? Because you don't know details. That doesn't change anything though. Even if you knew what those details were, it doesn't change what you ought to be doing now. Yeah, so I like that. Switch it up a little bit. You talked about back to the looking to your past and hope, which is again that was a hot take. Like as I'm looking through, like no, you know, hope is always forward looking, but no, it's looking at you did a really good job of applying that. But also like maybe you can help me with this. I get that. Seems like there's a tension between knowing that my past is what shapes me as a person, but also not letting, I think the word you use, not letting your past define you or determine who you are. So it's like there's, you can call it a balance, but it feels like tension of not letting my past determine who I am as a person, but also knowing that my past is largely what made me. So talk about that if you can a little bit, like how do we manage that tension?
So, I mean, I'm just gonna go back to this. So when you're looking back at your past, a lot of us have, you know, different trauma and different things that we're ashamed of. And I think you have to let your past affect who you are today to a certain point. But it's when it's to the point of like damaging who you are, damaging like the confidence that you have today. Um, I don't. Okay, I'll talk about it. So, in my past, one of the things I'm ashamed of is when my grandfather died. He Bush is nodding his head. You know part of the story, not this part. Um, so my grandfather died during COVID year. He was on like one of those ventilators or whatever, but he was already brain dead. And so we decided to let him go because there was really no hope for him coming back. And because I was a kid and it was COVID year and everything, the hospital had restrictions and I couldn't go see him. And my uncle, he still offered, he's like, you know what, I'll hold the phone up. That way, you know, you guys can talk to him and everything and like kind of say your goodbyes, like just over the phone. And so my parents offered that to us, to me and my two brothers, and I said no. Because I was I was scared to say goodbye and like I didn't know how to tell him that I appreciated him. And so I think that's looking back on my past, you know, I'm ashamed of it. But then if I ever have an opportunity like that again, I'm not going to miss it. And I think that's kind of how you have to look at your past. Just do better than you did before.
Well said. I like that. We got a few minutes. Classmates, you got anything for Kyle? All right, I got one more thing. I always have one more thing. He has a moment. Oh, okay. I really like the idea that if you have that moment, that experience of feeling close to God, you know, and this, that, and the other, that you mentioned, like, that's all well and good, but if you don't do anything about it, like, you don't do anything with it, I think is the way you said it. That was really great. That has nothing to do with what else I want to talk about. But also you mentioned in the present complacency. And you sort of define it as excessive contentment. And I tend to think of contentment as something that you can't really have too much of, but I get what you're saying. Could you speak a little bit more to this excessive contentment, like the complacency that you're talking about? Like, maybe flesh that out a little bit to where it's like, okay, where are y'all in terms of your complacency? Y'all are constantly having to think about next year because you're seniors in high school, right? What does it look like to get over, or to have the complacency, but then to get over the complacency of the here and now?
So I think complacency is bad when it breeds inactivity. So when you stop seeking like any progress or anything like that, if you're too content in where you are right now, like the soccer example that I talked about, if we get too complacent with our 1-0 lead, then we're letting down on the pressure on the other team, and then they're going to go ahead and they might find it easier to score if we're too complacent. But we also have to be a little bit smart. We also may not attack quite as hard, and we might defend a little bit harder. So there has to be like a balance like in being content and like being inactive, I think.
Like that. Anything else?